Hello, AP World. All right, so today we're going to be introducing what a DBQ is and how it is assessed. And then in the next video, we're going to look at some tips and tricks for how to tackle the DBQ. And then lastly, I'm going to give you a little slideshow presentation about the formatting and how you respond or create your essay to accomplish this DBQ question. All right, so let's dive in by talking about just what is the DBQ. So the DBQ is one of the two essays you're going to be asked to write on the AP exam, assuming that it's the typical exam. All right, so you have a 1 hour block of time to answer this question, read through documents, and then write your essay. Now, it's broken into two parts. You have a 15-minute reading session. And in that 15 minutes, that's when you're going to be looking over your 7 documents and hopefully trying to isolate or find the best evidence, the best pieces of information that will help you craft your DBQ. And so really the goal of this DBQ is not to go through and just read a bunch of documents and give a report. The goal is for you as a historian to create an argument, to create a claim or a thesis where you take a position on the prompt and then you use those documents as almost like ammunition to back up your claim, to back up your argument. Okay, and so here's roughly how they look. So this is an actual one from 2019. And you'll notice, right, the format. They give you a prompt. The prompt for this one says, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. So it's going to be your goal to come up with an answer to that question. So to what extent? A little bit, a lot, not at all. And so to help you, then they give you these 7 documents. And so in that 15 minutes, you're reading these documents. In those 15 minutes, you're going to be, identifying key passages and maybe underlining them, highlighting them. I would encourage you, as we've worked on in class, right, to come up with a little code and just write in the margins real quickly. So, they changed it through taxes. They changed it through war. They didn't change it because Muslims still have power, whatever, right? So you're going to have a quick little code. You read it, right? And you go through it. And in the end of this, hopefully you should notice a trend, right? You'll notice that, well, the Portuguese really did change warfare, but they really didn't change trade, and they kind of changed taxes, right? Whatever. So those trends then will become your answer. If you're in a 5-body paragraph, well, one of your body paragraphs is going to talk about how they really changed warfare or how they made things more militaristic. Maybe one of your body paragraphs then will talk about how they kind of changed taxation, but they did not change the fact that Muslims still heavily dominated places like India as like the rulers of that region. They didn't come in and change the leadership. Now all I have to do is come up with a thesis that reflects those ideas, and you're well on your way. So let's take a look at the rubric. Let's see what the College Board is actually going to assess you on. So the first point, and arguably the most important point of this whole rubric, is the thesis or the claim. It's worth 1 of the 7 total points that the DBQ is graded on. And notice it says responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim. And here's a key that establishes the line of reasoning. You cannot say the Portuguese really changed trade. That does not explain what you're going to talk about. If you said that the Portuguese really changed trade because of war, that still does not establish a line of reasoning. That line of reasoning then is where you really make it clear what you're going to say. So the Portuguese, to a heavy extent, changed trade based on the increasing use of violence to acquire goods. That's a topic, right? They're using more violence because it helps them get stuff. Okay, and so you'll notice it says the thesis must consist of 1 or more, and I would argue it's probably more. You're probably looking at a 2-sentence thesis, and I would put it right at the end of your introduction, because that's going to then guide where we go in the rest of it. Now, I would also say in your intro, I would also hammer contextualization. So I would also put that in your introduction. Contextualization is one point, and what contextualization is asking you to do is describe a broader historical context that's relevant to the prompt. Now, notice over here it says to earn that point, you have to make sure that you're being careful here. You could look at historical events or processes that are occurring at the same time, but in other places, or you could look at things that were going on before or after your question. And the key really is that this point is not awarded for merely a phrase or a reference. You cannot just have one passing sentence and have that count as context. If you bring it up in your intro and you kind of give some context, you should revisit that idea somewhere then in your essay. So for example, if we're looking at Indian Ocean trade and the Portuguese over there, maybe you would want to talk about contextually how before the Portuguese showed up, Muslim merchants had dominated trade because of impuria, or using monsoons as this way to travel. They were stuck in India for half the year, which meant that they became more invested in kind of leadership and communities in that region. That could be your context. Your context could be looking at where else in the world other Europeans were going and how they changed things. So that's contextualization. All right, now the third part is evidence, and this really will have a larger role when we get to the body paragraphs. Now notice there's a key here. There's 7 documents that they give you. Notice how it says you get 1 point if you use the content of at least 3 of the documents to address the prompt. So 3 of those 7 documents are correctly used in your essay. You're giving attribution, you're citing information, and you've incorporated it. That's 1 point. You get 2 points, right? So you get a bonus point if you're supporting your argument and you're using at least 6 of the 7 documents. So notice the difference. You're using content or you're really supporting an argument. So this is like, yeah, you had some good info and you understood what was going on. This is your claim was really being well defended. Throughout your essay, you had a nice argument and you were using the information the correct way. And it's 6 of the 7 documents. My advice to you would always be try to use all 7 documents. That way, if you screw up, you don't instantly drop from 2 points down to 1 point. It gives you that little ability to tuck that in there. Now, again, you don't want simply just a quote. We've looked at this in class, right? A quote is fine, but you want to embed just that little piece into your argument, into your idea, right? Just taking a sentence and dumping it in there isn't going to be enough, right? This is where you really have to start using your voice. Okay, on a related note, so under evidence, but a slightly different distinction, you can bring in outside info. So they call it evidence beyond the document. So you can earn another point by bringing in an additional historical fact that was not found in the documents, but is directly related to the prompt. So in essence, what you're doing is you're making your own document, right? So you're bringing an 8th concept to the table here. It has to be very specific and it has to directly connect to the prompt. If you talk about something that's helpful, but it doesn't really help answer the prompt, that's probably more contextualization than it is beyond the document. To go beyond the document, you want to be as specific to say, well, one other thing that was going on at this time was the fall of the Sultanate of Delhi. And so that meant that there was greater, destabilization in northern India, which the Portuguese used to their advantage in order to create a greater stranglehold over politics and trade in the region. That might be your outside document. The documents didn't say that, but you know that. You bring that to the argument, and that helps defend your point that the Portuguese did, to a large extent, influence trade. All right, then the last part is analysis and reasoning. And there's 2 last points up for grab here. One of them is source analysis. And this is one that we've looked at a lot in class. For at least 3 of the 7 documents, you're going to look at point of view, purpose, historical situation, audience, tone, reliability, right? And look at how the source impacts the message, right? So you're sourcing at least 3 of the documents. Attribution is not source analysis. So just by saying in a letter to the king, Duke so-and-so, blah, blah, that's not sourcing. You'd have to go further and say, but as a noble who serves the king, it's unsurprising that he would blank, 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 or his tone is da, 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 and that will change his message by, or the purpose of this document was meant to persuade people, which is why he's using very emotional language and therefore may not accurately reflect what was happening at that time, right? It's where you really dig into the source. And then lastly, the final point is complexity. And I'll be honest with you, this is the unicorn point, right? This is the white buffalo. This point is extremely difficult to get. And truthfully, I'd tell most of you not to even bother. It's probably more stressful and more of a waste of time than it's really worth to try to get this point. If you're like, wow, really good at this and confident with these other 6 points, certainly go for it. Basically, what happens in the complexity category is you're actually modifying the point of the essay to add yet another element to be analyzed. So not only are you going to be looking at what extent did the Portuguese influence trade, but you also want to look at similarities and differences between that and the Dutch, or the way the Spanish treated the Native Americans. Or you could look at continuity and change over time. So looking at these documents, you've noticed that early on, the Portuguese were like very accommodating and gentle and didn't change many things. But by the end, they became very militaristic and aggressive. Well, looking at your 3 groups, but also explaining that there's this other thing going on, this phenomenon of change, that could get you a bonus point. Looking at multiple causes and effects for the information that you're seeing. So this happened, but I know because blah, 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 and this next thing happened. And the effect of that was to try to really tie in those relationships. That could earn you a bonus point. The average score out of 7 is usually about a 3 out of 7. And so that's really where I think we can win on the essays, right? If you have a thesis, no doubt, context should be easy, and you use all of the documents correctly, you're already over average. Then you bring in extra info and you do some source analysis. Now you're at a 6 out of 7. That's double the average score. It makes you not so worried about not getting that 7th point because most people are going to get 3 or fewer. And so getting 7, not likely. Getting 6 puts you on a real course for success. All right, guys, thanks. And we will talk about some tips next.